Good morning, all. Welcome, welcome, one and all. Wherever you are on the planet, wherever you are in the world, good morning, good afternoon. As you all know, I am always on the lookout for great people who are doing great things for the planet, with the planet, and moving humanity forward. Some may call it stalking. I call it, looking around for good people on Twitter. This week, my special guest is Dr. Sarah Fine, and she is a TED Talk person, an author, a teacher, an administrator, a coach, a mentor. Did I miss anything?
That's a lot of names. No, I think you got it.
Okay, well, hopefully I didn't cover everything. I'm going to start the way I start with everyone, which is to give you 30 seconds to give us your bio, a little bit about yourself. So whatever that means to you, get started and join us. Welcome and join us.
Yeah,
Thank you.
thanks for having me. I appreciate it. I also look around for good people on Twitter, so we share that in common. So 30 seconds, that's tricky. I'll start with the here and now. So I am a teacher and a teacher of teachers. That's my my deep professional identity at this point. So I started my career in a 10th grade English classroom in the District of Columbia, and 18 years later, I'm now running a teacher preparation program called the San Diego Teacher Residency, where we're really trying to figure out, like, how do we prepare teachers for the schools that we need, not just for the ones that we have, and how do we prepare a different type of teacher? So how do we find the folks who represent the rich diversity of our communities and help them really thrive in the systems that we have that are quite broken? How do we help our folks fix those systems and really organize them for liberation?
Okay, great. That was a great kickoff. That was about 30 seconds, give or take. We don't mind if people go a little long because sometimes people like yourself have done so much. It's hard to condense everything into 30 seconds. So let's jump right in and keep going. I was doing some research, doing some reading, and I saw a couple of things that really stood out for me. They really grabbed my attention that I wanted to ask you about and ask you to define for the listeners. And the first thing is, can you tell us a little bit about what the best high schools have in common? The best high school classrooms have in common?
That's a great question. Well, I've been in a lot of high schools. I've taught in some and observed in many more for the research I did for my book. So, that said, as a caveat, that obviously I haven't been in every school, and I would argue every good school is distinctively good in a different way. But also, I do think you're right. They have something in common. I think the biggest one is around kids feeling seen and known and valued and connected to each other and to the adults in the building, and feeling a sense of belonging, like they have something to add to the community that they're in that school, and people really see them for what they can be and who they are, and not for what they're missing or what they aren't. And that plays out in a number of different ways. I think there's a lot of different ways that schools can get there. But I think that's the thing that feels so different when you walk into a school that's really a thriving community, is like the kids feel like they have a place and they know who they are and they know the folks around them and they feel valued.
Okay, excellent. Talk to us a little bit about deeper learning.
Yeah, well, I wrote 400 pages on it with my colleague Tom Mehta, so excuse me if I just open up the book and start reading. Well, deeper learning is a tricky word because my colleague and I, for various reasons, back about a little more than 10 years ago, went out in search of it. And we went in search of it because we had this profound sense that a lot of what happens in schools, especially high schools, is not deep. It's very shallow. It's very superficial. There's a lot of things that have nothing to do with learning, right? Everybody's grubbing for grades, everybody's memorizing content, everybody's playing some game that nobody really wants to be a part of. At least that was the experience I had as a high school student, and for the most part, and certainly what I've observed in my own classrooms and have probably even produced as a teacher in some cases. So we went out looking for classrooms where there was rich engagement, not just intellectual engagement, but personal engagement with what was being learned, where the focus was on learning, not just on performing, whereas on the process of getting better at something, knowing something more deeply, thinking about it from multiple angles, thinking about how, one phenomenon fits in with another set of phenomena, like really the world of ideas, and the kind of hearts and minds work that is moving to people when they're actually learning something. We were looking for schools that were in some ways accomplishing that and helping students to find that in their classroom. So I think deeper learning in some ways is a real vague term, right? It's like deeper than what? But I also think like everybody probably, if you stop and think, you kind of know deeper than what, like, what the what is, like the
Mhm.
shallow knowledge centric, performance centric, grade centric type work that a lot of schools are organized to produce. Like, we don't want that. So our question was like, what else is there beyond that, that is more authentic for the learners and also for the educators?
Okay, let me ask you this because this is always a question that I've had, and people have. I've had different conversations, debates, chats with people about this topic, which is, if you have, let's say you're in a school and it's not one of the best, it's not one of, the best that you found, like in terms of your study and your research. Is it possible for one teacher to commit to deeper learning and then that have a ripple effect? Is it contagious? That's what I'm asking. Is it contagious in
Mm,
terms of both students as well as instructors?
that's a great question. The first part of the question, can it exist? Like, can you walk into a school where there's a lot of shallow, superficial learning happening? Will you find pockets where
Mhm,
there's something different and more powerful happening? My answer to that is absolutely. It's everywhere. I mean, every school I've ever been to, even the most traditional under-resourced schools you might imagine that aren't making it onto the, top 10 lists, or they're not the darlings of all the
mhm,
grant makers, you're going to find teachers who are doing really powerful, authentic upstream work in their classrooms.
mhm,
And we found, Jal and I, when we went out looking for it, we were really excited about that because it felt like it doesn't matter where you go. There are going to be some people who are doing something different. Um, that's the good news. The bad news, I think, that is it contagious? I think the ways that most traditional schools in the US are organized makes it very hard for teachers to
mhm,
actually learn from and with each other's practice, because often teachers have no idea what's going on the other side of the wall of their classroom, right? Like, they
mhm,
might have a colleague who's one room over who's doing things really differently, more powerfully, getting kids really engaged. And very rarely do those teachers have an opportunity to talk about their practice, to see each other at work, to compare what are you trying to do and what dilemmas are you experiencing that I might be able
mhm,
to solve, what do I want to work on that you might be able to solve. I think there's a shift. I do think a lot of schools are starting to recognize that that's a problem and that we should be having teachers in community with each other more often than they usually are. But I think historically, unfortunately, like, you have these pockets that never spread because it's teachers are just working in isolation from each other, and they have very little support or eyes from the administration even. So there's not even great opportunities to like elevate great work. I think the best schools are pushing against that grain and making teaching
mhm.
transparent and forming communities of practice and getting teachers into each other's classrooms and having public exhibitions of learning so you can see what's going on in other classrooms. But I don't think that that's the norm yet. I think it could be.
Okay, okay. Can you talk a little bit about, excuse me, the ethics of contribution?
Yeah, that's a word we use in our book. Yeah, it's kind of a fancy academic phrase, but I think ultimately what I was writing about there is that the most powerful learning spaces are organized to have learners really do something that matters, and that has
Wow.
value
Mhm,
to someone. So, if you go into a classroom where kids are writing yet another 5 paragraph essay that their teacher is going to grade, that then is going to go in the trash can, there's nothing authentic, or it's
mhm,
very unusual for that to feel personally authentic or authentic to a larger community. But if you walk into a classroom where kids are grappling with a problem in their community and trying to
mhm,
think about how they can understand the root causes of the problem and take action to try to address it, all of a sudden there's a sense, number one, we're working on something that matters to us, that impacts our lives. And number two, we can be change agents. I think that's one of the things about it's a real stance toward young people that the best teachers in schools adopt, which is seeing young people as a huge asset to our communities, not as like, you know, little humans who need to have somewhere to spend their days while their parents are
Right.
at work, but like,
Right.
but like people who can like
Mhm.
do things of consequence. And so, even like art classes, good, really strong art classes where kids are doing multiple drafts of work and eventually exhibiting their work to each other, that's contribution too, right? Like they're making an aesthetic contribution to their school or their classroom or their home, work that they're proud of, that they feel
Mhm.
like does something good in the world, even if it's just the world of their kitchen, that's
Mhm.
very different than the essay that goes in the trash can at the end of the day. So that's what we were writing about when we were thinking about powerful learning spaces are ones where kids feel positioned to do work that matters, and maybe it matters to them and maybe it matters to others, maybe both, but like there's some authentic value to the work that they're doing that's not just about getting a grade, moving on to the next grade, and so on.
Okay, yeah, it makes me think of I did some training with Mockingbird. I've done a couple of trainings with Mockingbird. And one of the things that I learned, and I had been teaching a while before I got to the training. And one of the things I learned, the most pivotal thing that I learned a lot of stuff, and I took Mockingbird. I had training in 2016, and then I had a week-long training in 2018. But the most powerful thing that I remember from that training that I actually took back to every class that I've taught since is, you know, helping people, giving them something that, like you said, that matters, they can use right away. And I tell all my students all the time, I'm not going to ever teach you anything that you can't take and use today. And if you
Mm-hmm,
can't attach
mm-hmm,
it to your life outside of the time you're with me, why are we going over this? Why are we
mm-hmm,
covering this? If you can't use it immediately. And I remember, and it's funny, it's like at the end of whenever I teach at the end of it, there's usually some conversation or some reflection about, okay, tell me something that you covered today that either makes you think differently and or something you can take and use tonight when you leave this class. Like when you walk out of here right now,
yeah, yeah,
if there any, it is it's got to be something you can use because if it hasn't, that means I haven't done my job. And I remember that's always scary for teachers to put that out there to say,
yeah,
well, you know, give me the real feedback, not what you think I want to hear. And what I find is that people really appreciate that openness when you say, I'm here to support you and have us do something
mm-hmm,
together that, like you said, that matters, that means something. And I think people can see through it when it's not real. I think people know if you're just trying, like you said, move them along, get them to chapter 5 and chapter 6, which is as opposed
mm-hmm,
to saying, hey,
mm-hmm,
well, we were going to do this, but now we can take this interesting turn because this came up, right? And let's
mm-hmm.
manage this. Um, what do you call those things that they light? And I always want to call them a Mazel Tov cocktail, but that's not it. Well, you light it, you throw it, and it blows up. But
Yeah,
sometimes you have that in a classroom, like a discussion, something will come up, right? And
yeah, yeah,
you can't pretend it didn't come up, but it's almost like you have to incorporate it and say, okay, well, yeah, we were going to go this path, and we'll
yeah,
get there at some point, but this is more interesting and this is more engaging to the young people
yeah,
I'm in front of now, right? As
yeah,
opposed to like, no, 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 that wasn't part of my plan. We have to stick with.
yeah. I think that dance you're describing, it's something I spend a lot of time trying to help my new teachers
Mm-hmm.
learn, which is like you need to have goals, ideally like thoughtful goals for the learning experiences you facilitate in your classroom. And you got to be flexible in responding to the needs and the interests of the kids in the moment. And so
Right.
there's some dance between, getting exactly where you thought you were going to get to and actually making sure that like your response to their when they're reaching out wanting to connect to the content, that you can help them make that authentic connection, because if they're not making that connection, it's not, like you said, it's not worth it, like there's nothing
Right.
there for them.
And they don't
Yeah,
and then there's no reason to connect it with anything, which means you're gonna have to reteach it anyway.
right,
But
yeah,
there's not
exactly.
an emotional connection, you know. Um, can you describe, I know you have an ethnic ethnographic background. Can you describe in 25 words or less what ethnography means, or being an ethnographer means. 25 words or less. Let's see if you can do it.
25 words. Man, I teach a whole class on this. um, Ethnography is learning about the world through listening and observing and engaging with human behaviors. How many words am I at
Wow.
now?
Wow, that was 24. You got it.
Okay, there we go.
Yay. Okay, you got it. So if anybody ever wants that definition, I will send them your way or let
Oh,
them watch this. That was 24 words. That was perfect.
I
You had
think there
one
are
word
others who have done a much better job. But you know, ethnographers basically it's like the academic version of journalism, but with more, in some ways, I would argue with more like deep processes, right? You're not just going to find a story. You're trying to understand the world by listening and engaging and observing and participating, and then eventually trying to feed back a story that feels authentic to the folks that you're with.
Okay. I like it. I like it. And I like the fact, I'm going to back up a little bit. You said something really great about, um, well, two things sprung to mind. You said something really great about young people and them not just being little humans to kind of shuttle away for 8 hours so parents go to work. So a couple of things I wanted to point out with that is that first I have a question. Um, why are we as adults, as people on the planet, so afraid? Because I think it's fear. Why are we so
Uh-huh.
afraid of doing exactly what you said about letting young people, um, basically sharing power with young people and letting them know they
Uh-huh.
have power? Why does that scare us so much?
That is a great question. Um, well, I think number one, we're socialized not to, especially as teachers, right? We're socialized to believe that our authority comes from having power over young people,
Mm-hmm.
and that somehow our own sense of um, efficacy is somehow in relation to others needing us to know more, be better, be more mature, be more skillful. And, you know, on some level that is true. And on another level, if we take it too far, it's exactly what you said. We're not going to see young people as being full of possibilities. We're going to see them as needing to be controlled.
Right.
Right. I think that there's a piece there around equity and identity, because I think in schools in particular, but arguably in our whole society, young people who have certain identity markers, for example, are young men of color, and our teenagers, and especially our teenage young men of color, for example, we tend we're socialized into a world that sees that as a threat, that somehow there's something
Mm-hmm.
threatening, and so the response to control is like a threat response. It's not, it shouldn't be, but it is, versus like, oh my goodness, these are humans who have so much to offer. How do we hold power
Mm-hmm.
with them, like you're saying, you know? But I think in schools you see greater amounts of power hoarding on the part of adults in high poverty schools where it's predominantly students of color. And when
Mm-hmm.
you go into schools that are predominantly, you know, upper income white kids, you actually see more freedom, more trust in those kids to,
Mm-hmm.
you know, to be the agents that they can be. So I think you see very like racialized, very oppressive patterns around, you know, trying to control versus trying to empower young people, that play out along racial lines and along gender lines and all the other lines we could identify. And those are in schools as much as they are, you know, beyond schools as well.
Okay. Yeah, that leads me to my another question about, I know you were teaching in DC,
Hmm.
and I know you, I watched your TED talk a couple of times. You're talking about being this young white female and this, and thinking that you have, it sounds to me, I'm paraphrasing, it sounds to me like you were told, like I was told when I first started teaching, that, it's all about the control, right?
Yep.
Don't
Yep.
smile till December. Don't, it's all about basically, you have to scare and intimidate folks,
Yep.
which I've always pushed back against, because I always felt like, well, I don't do my best learning when I'm terrified, or
Right.
when I'm being
Nobody does.
I know, that's what I'm
Nobody
saying.
does.
I've told
Yeah.
people I've never done my best learning, and I don't feel, or when I'm being terrorized, that isn't
Mhm.
that my brain is all about trying to survive and not be hurt,
Yeah.
right? So I don't know why people think that's the only way to teach, but that seems to be the thing. So my question to you is, what do you know? Because now you've got almost 2 decades under your belt. What do
Mhm.
you know now that you didn't know then, or you wish you had known when you went in the day one?
Mm. It's a big question. Huh. So much, everything. I'll just start with that. I didn't know anything. I was such a clueless young teacher, and that some of that's my own personal responsibility, but
Mhm,
also some of that is the system should not have allowed me to be a teacher without any formal training, which it did. Um, I would say to your point, I did not know the difference between relational authority, I guess, like having authority with my students, not over them, but with them,
mhm,
because I had rich relationships with them that allowed them to let me guide their learning. That's obviously what I think now is kind of
mhm,
where you need to head as a teacher. Like the authority is rooted in relationships and mutual respect, and authenticity, and the quest to know each other well enough and to enter into agreements that allow you to learn together. I think I didn't know any better than to think it was about power over, and it was
mhm,
about being an authoritarian, and it was about knowing more than my students did. I think I reassured myself that I could be a teacher because I knew more than my students did about
mhm,
some stuff. And content knowledge matters. It does. I wouldn't say we should just throw somebody, into a science classroom who doesn't have any science content knowledge, but that is not actually the source of a teacher's authority with
mhm,
students, right? Like that isn't, it's important, but it's like, it's necessary but not sufficient, I suppose. Like the
mhm,
sufficient is like build the relationships and the trust and be curious about each other and position yourself as somebody who is there to support and facilitate, and then you can use your expertise in the content to help kids connect. But without that first bit, all bets are off. You're not going to teach them anything. And I maybe at some point I started to learn that that was true, but I didn't know how to do it anyway, so it wasn't much use to me. Like I didn't know how to
okay,
build relationships with my kids.
okay, okay. Well, all right. I definitely want to have you back on the show for a deeper dive. And the next time will have read your book cover to cover and highlighted and
Okay.
underlined and draw things and made connections in my own mind. Like, oh yeah, this would be a good project one day, or this would be great to do this. But I'm going to wrap up so you can have your evening back. But I want to do the way that I wrap up. I have a list of 7 questions that Minnie Driver, she has a podcast, and I heard her ask Viola Davis these questions. And I
Oh my
thought,
gosh.
whoa, then I thought, oh, I'm gonna steal those. Those are excellent.
Now,
So
now
I
I'm nervous here. Viola Davis
no,
is a tough act to follow.
she gave some wonderful responses, and I thought, oh, those are really good. So I'm gonna shoot those off to you. Those 7. We'll start now. When we're done with that, we'll tell folks how to reach out to you, how to find you. So here's the first question, and this will be kind of a cheat for you because I know you were an English major. So what relationship, real or fictionalized, epitomizes love for you?
Ooh. Well, I was an English major, but now, of course, my brain is spinning, and I have too many possibilities here. um, in their eyes, we're watching God. Zora Neale
Mm.
Hurston. There is an amazing relationship there, and of course, now I'm blanking on the main character's name, but the main
Tea cake.
character,
Tea
yeah,
cake.
absolutely, those two. That's an amazing relationship, and it's kind of a failed relationship, and that's part of the truth of it as well. So,
Okay. Wow. Oh my goodness. Okay. What question would you most like answered?
how can we solve the climate crisis?
Oh, wow.
I think a lot about that right now.
Okay.
Can we, and if so, how? I guess that's my question.
Okay. Okay. Where and when were you, where were you in your life? Where or when in your life are you the most happiest? Or were you the happiest?
I love hiking, and I
Mm,
grew up in I grew up in the mountains in New England, and I particularly now my children are old enough to hike with me at least sometimes when I bribe them with enough chocolate. So I love hiking with my family, being on a mountaintop for sure.
okay. All right. What quality do you least like about yourself?
I am a perfectionist,
Okay.
and I am constantly trying to undo the damage of that.
Okay.
I think I need to be gentler with myself and with others, and more
Okay.
patient.
Okay. What person, place, or experience most altered your life?
I would say teaching in my classroom in Southeast DC was a profound had now that I look back at it, had a profound impact on my perspectives and my life choices.
Okay. Okay.
It disrupted a lot that I thought I knew, and it also initiated in me this like immense curiosity about teaching and learning that I have spent the rest of my, hopefully will spend the rest of my career investigating.
Wow. Okay. What is something that you created in the middle of a personal hardship? Something you created that was really beautiful and powerful in the midst of a personal hardship.
Hmm. Um, wow, that's a deep one. I had a very tough first year as a parent, as I think a lot of people, women in particular, did. And I started writing letters to my son as a way to try to connect with him and see myself as a parent. And I think that became a tradition. I still write him letters. He's almost 10 now. So I think that was a moment I would name like that.
Okay. Okay. Final question. Last meal.
Like literally my last meal.
Yeah, if you were gonna, if yeah, no, 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 no. I mean, if your last meal on the earth, like if you knew you were gonna,
Oh, got it. I was going to say that was like a Trader Joe's salad, nothing exciting. Fresh baked bread with
mm,
melted cheese and a lot of fresh fruit.
okay, okay, all right. Well, Miss Sarah, Dr. Fine, that
It's
concludes
great
our
to connect
interview.
with you.
You too. I'm glad that we did this. The next time we talk, we'll talk about high tech high
That
and
sounds
our
great.
connection there because we know some of the same people. And that, like I said, that was a really great, scary, eye-opening experience for me about, and it was scary because of the possibilities. Like, oh, okay,
Mm,
you can do, you don't have to limit it to this. Like, you can be, you can make mistakes. You can do big.
yeah.
You can have a whole lot of chaos, knowing that yeah, it's not going to always be this way. So I
Yeah.
definitely
Oh,
want
I'm
to talk
glad to
about
hear
that.
that. Yeah,
Okay.
let's do it.
So
I really
yes.
appreciate the conversation, Anthony. It's great.
And how can people reach out to you if they want to hear more of your wisdom, hear your TED talk? How can people find you?
On Twitter for sure. I'm at Sarah M Fine, and then if you private message me on Twitter, I'm happy to send you folks my email and just communicate directly as well.
Okay. Well, people can find me at my website, anthony-carter.com, my production company, where I do documentary films to create social change. And that website is Burn the Manual Productions. Once again, thank you for joining us. Have a great evening. I will let you know when this goes live, and I'll talk to you soon.
Okay, thanks so much for having me.
Thank
Bye
you.
bye.
Bye bye.